and that phenomena is actually a UNESCO World Heritage and is loved out there. But remember, Burundi is a landlocked country bordered by Rwanda, Tanzania, and the DRC, home to Lake Tanganyika, one of the deepest lakes in the world. But let's go to the proverb today that we get from the Burundians. Help is sweetest when it comes from the heart. Help is sweetest when it comes from the heart. How would you interpret that?
Thank you very much, Dennis. And once again, it's a pleasure to be back here. And thank you for the proverb from Burundi. In the context of today's discussion, as Christians and as the church, we are called to practice the virtue of caritas, of love. And in the Gospel of Luke, I think chapter 6 and 45, it clearly states that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and therefore that shows that intentions that are driven from the heart are first and foremost pure and genuine. It's not hypocritical, and therefore, as the Burundians would say, it is the sweetest and very, very genuine. And that is why, even in the context of this discussion, if the people of Kenya are willing to pay tax when they know that the intentions are genuine and nobody is going to waste our public funds. So with our hearts, we can truly develop this nation.
True.
Indeed. True. We're in political silly season already, and it's just we liken it to the time where there's hunting season and there's like a message that goes out to the people in the community and say, actually, you know what, now that the winter is over and the spring birth have happened, you can actually pull out your rifles and you can go and hunt. It seems like that bell has actually been rung in Kenya for politics, because we're going to an election in the next 1.5 years. Is it? Yeah, about a year and 3 months from now. So everybody and their uncle is out doing whatever they need to do. And one of the places whereby this season is playing out is the church. We've had this conversation so many times. And so we thought about it and we said, you know what? Perhaps, is it time for us to accept that politics will be played out on the pulpit, and we say, you know what? It's okay. You go ahead. You want to come to church and do what you need to do? It's okay. You want to spread your message? It's okay. Go ahead and do it, because it seems as though people have tried to say the church is sacrosanct and you should. Okay, well, you know what? It's okay. Go ahead, do it. Should we take that position?
Thank you very much, Du. It is indeed true that Kenyans are preparing for the forthcoming elections in 2027, and already political parties are coming up with their strategies and so on. But first and foremost, it is very, very important for us to understand that Article 8 of the Constitution of Kenya clearly states that there shall be no state religion in Kenya, and further Article 32 makes provisions for the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And we have to remember that the relationship between the state and the church goes back to the early centuries, when the Edict of Milan was passed, and it provided for a freedom of religion through the doctrine that is called libertas religiosa, and which gives everyone the opportunity to practice their faith and religion. And as the late Dr. Henry Okulu, who was a bishop of the Anglican Church, clearly said, we cannot separate religion and politics, and therefore it is the right of every Kenyan, and it is the right of every Christian to practice their religious and even political beliefs. And therefore I see no crime, I see no problem if politicians and Kenyans at large can express a political view. And do remember the meaning of the church in the original Greek, it meant ecclesia, and ecclesia in Greek simply meant that it is a assembly of citizens for legislative purposes, and that clearly shows that from the very, very beginning, church has always played politics, and we should go out there and stand out for the rights of the people of Kenya. Because remember, we are in a state where there is a lot of political intolerance. Look at what has happened to Senator Sifuna yesterday, being kicked out of the ODM party as the Secretary General, simply because he's able to stand up for the rights of Kenya. So in summary, I would say that yes, it is okay, it is biblical for the church to take political stand and speak out.
So one would then ask the question, at what point do we separate politics from this core business of church, which is nourishing our hearts and souls? You know what I mean? Because we look at some of the reasons that the clergy has given in banning politics from being played in the church, especially on the pulpits. And it is they are protecting the altar from politics, because the altar is where the message of the word of God is sent, not politicians to come exchange words and campaign in churches to avoid division among congregants. Fine, I am in church. I am here to get the word. I'm not interested in politics being sent. Fine, you'd say everyone has their right to play politics and listen to politics, but equally there are those who genuinely go to church for the word and not to listen to politics. That you're forcing politics on me in a place where I know what my business is. How do you balance that? So one then asks the question, when you see the clergy say, no more campaigning in churches, no more exchange of words in churches, in places of worship, while in the same constitution, we have right to worship and politics is our business. Where's the equilibrium? How do we balance that?
In my humble opinion, politics does not defile the altar. If anything, the word politics is the science of governance. Mm-hmm. And remember the message that the Lord Jesus Christ brought to this world, which the church supports. It's about the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is about governance. It's about joy, peace in the Holy Spirit. And therefore, it is really, really incorrect for the clergy to say that politics should be kept out of the church. And let me make this very, very clear. Mm-hmm. There is a difference between political campaigns when politicians go to churches and raise contention issues and they fight and so on and so forth. What I mean by politics in the church is for the church to stand up calling for good governance and really calling for social justice for the people of Kenya. And if we look at the history of the church all over the world, for instance, consider what happened in South Africa during the apartheid period. We had a clergy like Archbishop Desmond Tutu who really stood up for the rights of black people. In the United States, we had Dr. Martin Luther King, who was really in the forefront for civil rights, and you can remember the "I Have a Dream" speech that he made in the 60s until this was confirmed when President Obama came into power. So I think there is need for people not to demonize politics and really see it as such an evil that is meant for the heathen people, as something that should be kept away of the church.
Dr. One would ask the question then, during the week, I am around the country in public meetings during my campaign and have literally abused people in my campaign. Mm-hmm. On Sunday, I'm in church, saying, praise God, may the peace of the Lord be with you. You know what I mean? And I'm here again speaking the word. Does that make sense?
Jesus came to look for, the sheep that were lost, and therefore those politicians who, perhaps abuse people and so on.
Should they be allowed to speak in church?
It is in the church where they can be corrected. It is in the church where, there can be spiritual reflections and so on. It is very, very critical that we should not be judgmental, even for these politicians. It should be clear that they have a right to express their views, and where their views, lead to hate speech, for example, then the law is very clear on how to deal with hate speech and so on. Yeah.
We have seen, unfortunately, that the pulpit is imagery as much as it's furniture.
Yeah.
That it's furniture in a sanctuary, but that it's also imagery in that it can be moved, and that the church also takes place on different platforms, whether it's in a wedding, a funeral, a get-together. But these seem to still be places whereby the pulpit is used to spread these messages. So there is a difference between using the pulpit for political gain and using the pulpit to send messages that teeter on the political. So there's a clear difference between the two. The question has been asked over and over again, should you allow politicians to come into church? Like Dennis has said, come into church, the pastor gives them time. They're not preaching the word because the pastor is there.
Yeah.
What they're doing is essentially trying to move and mix the congregation to look their way politically. We saw what happened just a few weeks ago in a church where, unfortunately, the congregants were fed a circus that should never have happened in church, where people decide that they're going to come and attack in a church by virtue of the fact that there were politicians there. There was nothing else that brought security agencies to that church, was it not for the politicians that were going to be in attendance. We know this. And so that desecrates the sanctity of that moment. So this is what we are saying, that it seems as though you can talk here until you're dry, but they're still good. They were there last weekend. They're going to be there this weekend, and probably every other weekend until the second Tuesday in August 2027. So should we not get to the place where we say, okay, fine, it's been reduced to that place where people can come and do as they like? I don't see the Islamic religion allowing people to come, and where will you even get time?
You can't even access
Where
it.
will you access it to come and say that you want to now start spreading those messages? Who will give you time?
You can't even access it to pray with them because there are rules.
There are rules. There is order. You want to do it, go outside. But now you can't come into this place where has the church let down its guard? I mean, we've had this conversation before, but it seems as though it's going nowhere. So when we talk about the separation of religion and state, it seems as though it is this Christianity that has an issue.
I think it is important, first and foremost, to make it clear that when the law enforcement officers attacked the church in Othaya, it actually amounted to violation of the Constitution and the rights of those worshippers. And there is a High Court decision that clearly specified that the police should not use tear gas in places of worship, and particularly the church. So the first stage is for the law enforcement, for the interior ministry to respect our places of worship. This reminds me of what happened on 7th July 1997 at the All Saints Cathedral here in Nairobi, where the activists had gathered, and then the paramilitary police invaded this particular place and subjected the activists and the worshippers to brutality, including the attack that took place against Reverend Timothy Joya at that time. But having said that you've asked whether Muslim allow people to make statements in their places of worship, which I do respect. But if we consider what happened, the event that happened at Othaya, Honorable Gachagua attended this service. He had not even spoken. The service was going on, and then suddenly goons and the police came in and attacked them. But let us not forget, if we consider the history of the church, particularly the Kenyan church, this is not the first time that leaders have ever spoken in churches. It happened before. It happened in the 80s and in the 90s. And some of the freedoms that we are enjoying today in Kenya is because of the clergy stood out for the prophetic voice. And remember, even in the very, very Old Testament, there were prophets that could tell the king that, listen, you are naked. And this is what we need in Kenya today, where the clergy can come out, whether personally as the clergy or by giving platform to different Kenyans to really expose those ills, corruption that happen in this country.
Dr. Should these happen in the church? Where am I going with this? If you just look at what the history of the altar, and the altar was used for burnt offering, peace offering, sin offering, grain offering, and that the only people, what it symbolized was holiness, order, and obedience to God. That only priests, pastors, evangelists could access the altar and speak to the congregants because of the sanctity that it came about. Because altars were put up when God had communicated to his people, That is how clean, that is how righteous the altar is. Now, one asks the question, in modern day politics, where we see individuals exchange words out there and come to church and want to express themselves, one says that is pretense. They're not genuine in what it is they're saying. I agree that even priests, even pastors, even imams have a right to have a political stand. Yeah. As Kenyans, as people who are implementing their civil rights, they have the right whatsoever to have the political stand. But how do we then ensure that even when other Kenyans can come in and express their political rights, they do not take away the sanctity of the church, of places of worship, and that you can come, you can worship, but you will not campaign inside the altar because it is reserved.
I think I have looked at the transformation of the church in Kenya vis-a-vis the relationship with the state and matters politics and so forth. And what is evident is that a number of church leadership recently came up with certain rules. For instance, they said that they would not accept gifts and donations from politicians, and others say that they would not allow politicians to express themselves and so on, which is within their constitutional mandate to define how they wish to worship, because you see the right to freedom of worship really allows religious leaders to define on their own what they expect, what rules that should be followed, and so on. Therefore, in my view, so long as the leadership of these religious institutions are okay with the politicians making statements or any other person taking positions in the church, and the church accepts it and they allow it, then I see no problem in that. But in the event that the church regulations state specifically that politicians are not allowed to make political statements inside the church, then I think the politicians have to respect those rules that the church is able to make.
Okay, interesting sessions this morning. We're going to take a break at this point, and we're going to come back and continue this conversation with Dr. Davies Okombo, because we're asking ourselves the question: is it not time? Then are we just let it down? Then they're going to use this position anyway, so you might as well allow them to go ahead and do so. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. It's a situation room this morning. We'll take a break, weather traffic, and then come back and continue with this. Don't go away. It's 7:30.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Two should not mix. Is it possible to say that there are notable figures, and you've given examples of those, Davis, around the world and even in Kenya, notable figures who, from the platform of church, went out into society, used the pulpit as a platform for sending these messages to talk about how there must be change in society. And we actually saw outcomes out of those, out of that discourse and out of that engagement, where we saw changes, where the freedoms then expressed were actually started to be felt by people. So that's there. But then there's also this: are we saying that because that happened and because it continues to happen, then those platforms should be allowed to be used by politicians? Because essentially what's happening, it is in church that a lot of the speeches that we now make reference to by leaders as high as the president have said things in a derogatory manner to other people, have basically essentially declared war politically on others from church. And you know what is interesting? Just look, we can pull them up if we have the time, but look at who is in the background when these things are being said. The clergy. Sometimes half asleep, other times laughing, other times sitting and essentially nodding in silence, but you're endorsing the message. Does it confuse us, or is it okay? Are we saying it's okay, come do whatever you want? And should we just stop having this conversation? Should this be, on 12th February, the last time we even talk about this? Because it's now become a tired conversation. People do it anyway, regardless of what you say. So should we just allow it to be?
Thank you very much. I think if we can look at the history of the church in politics in the recent past and compare this to what happened 30 years ago and so on, you'll realize that religious leaders like Bishop Mwana Wanzeki, Bishop Henry Okulu, and so on, they were the clergy who took strong positions against the government, and they were not allowing politicians, to come into their pulpit and make these strong and divisive statements and so on. So I think what I would wish to agree with you, one is that the church should be allowed the civic space to speak out against bad governance, against corruption, and all the ills in this society, which they should be able to do as they exercise their prophetic mandate. However, there should be discretion by the various religious leaders on who should be able to express their views in their religious spaces in this instance. But I would like to say that all statements that are divisive, that can amount to hate speech and incitement to violence, whether these statements are made by political leaders like the president and members of parliament and so on. I think this is wrong, and the church should take a position, because you see, our church has a lot of diversity among the congregation. There are people who support various sides of the political divide, and the clergy have a responsibility, to shepherd everyone in the best interest of the church and in accordance with their doctrinal positions.
Dr. Harry, I want to paint a situation where the current government that we do have largely gives credit to the church pretty much for being front in its campaign and ensuring that it gets to power. Yeah. But it comes later during the protest that we saw in the country when the church was firm and started speaking against the ills that the government is committing to its people, extrajudicial killings, lawlessness, unconstitutionalism in the country. And remember, the same individuals who are pro-church, who use the church to elevate themselves to the position of authority today, started hitting back hitting back the churches, saying that the church should let them work. The child has no place to speak. You know what I mean? If that is the history, the brief history from 2022 to 2026, should the church learn that politicians will come and use you for their benefit? Once you're out, they will do each and every single thing without remembering or paying homage to the church that was key and center to them being there. So from politicians, is it doublespeak, or is church just a conveyor belt for them to end up into leadership? And how should the church, knowing exactly what happened, handle that?
I concur with you, Dennis. Taking you back into history during the colonial time, the colonial authorities really misused the missionaries to call for submission of the the people that they call the natives, that were the people of Kenya at that time. And then coming back into the history of Kenya after the repeal of Section 2A of the Constitution, and the time when President Kibaki came into power, the church that once had a strong prophetic voice appeared to have lost that voice, and that is why in 2007 and 8 we had the post-election violence, and the church could not even participate in the mediation process, because the church was divided, along the political divide. There were those that were supporting President Kibaki and those that supported the then leader of the opposition, the late Right Honorable Raila Odinga. And we saw that repeating itself in the election of 2022, when the members of Kenya Kwanza even composed a song in Kiswahili saying si uchawi ni maombi. They believe that, we've been praying and so we didn't steal the election, we only prayed, and there was no witchcraft, and then we got into power and so on. And then came the Gen Z protest, and suddenly the Gen Z said, no, the church has lost a voice, no one is speaking. And the Gen Z even threatened to occupy these churches and point out and tell them, listen, church, you have lost your voice. And then suddenly the church had a Damascus event for once. They saw they saw the light, and then suddenly they started speaking about those extrajudicial killings and so on. So these are lessons that the church should take, as you have mentioned. They should know that politicians use people, institutions, and once their interests are served, then they begin introducing, like currently in Kenya, we have the Religious Organizations Bill of 2024. Now suddenly the church is evil, it needs to be regulated, and church, there should be no politics in church, and the clergy must have a diploma and a degree in theology. So this is sufficient evidence for the church to be very careful as we head to 2027. They must not forget their prophetic voice. And as Jesus said, they should know that their kingdom is not of this earth, and they must be able to stand and prepare their congregations.
You said that if the churches feel as though their platforms can be used by politicians to then be able to, because we are going to see it. Yeah. We are going to see it. It's probably going to start from this weekend, where everybody in the political space, whether they're going to truly worship or not, are going to be in churches. Like we said, we don't see other religions allowing this kind of thing to happen. But for some reason in the church it can. We also note that other religions are vocal about governance. They are. So we can't say that, well, the church has been vocal about governance only. No. the Islamic religion has been extremely vocal about governance matters in the country and other parts of the world. But it is within the church that this is allowed. It's going to happen this weekend. It's going to happen in the coming weeks. Are we saying that so long as that particular church has allowed for that to happen, then it should be okay? Every man unto his own. Then you should actually go ahead and let that happen. And mind you, we find that when this happens, it is also accompanied by a gift or a token of however much you want to say, 20 million today, 200,000 tomorrow to finish building or whatever it is that you're building. But it comes with that. So it looks as though this platform that is being used to speak is being paid for. You make reference to the issue in Witima in Othaya. It's just that the operation or whatever it was stopped, but there was going to be speaking on the pulpit in a political manner.
Yeah.
It was going to happen. It's just that the events kind of stopped that early. So are we saying that if a particular church has agreed for that to happen, it's up to them? Just allow them to continue doing it. It does no harm.
In my view, it is important to give space to the church leadership, especially the mainstream churches that have a stronger structures like the seat of bishops and so on. They should be allowed the space to exercise discretion and make determinations on how they would wish this matter to be settled. And it is on record that the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church of Kenya have even made decisions in this regard. So the questions that Kenyans can ask themselves, why is it that in certain churches that are members of the ACK, for example, allow politicians to use their platforms? These are questions that we can ask ourselves. And especially in the event where they speak against other communities and they promote ethnicity and violence and so on. I think this is very, very wrong, and the church needs to search its soul and make a decision that would, one, respect the Constitution of Kenya without infringing on the freedom of worship. And as I say this, it's also clear to send a very strong message to the law enforcement that regardless of the position of the church in matters politics, they should not actually attack the people in the church where women and children are gathered and fire tear gas and live bullet.
Yeah.
I think this is a red line that should not be crossed at all.
You see, the church has been used to communicate to politicians and address and point out the ills that have happened in society before. So you talk about the Ndingian Mwananzeki, Bishop Okulu, and we see how they spoke straight to power and how they called out the ills that happened at the time. Now, here is a position where we see the country find itself in a position where the political class is accused of corruption. The political class is accused of perpetrating extrajudicial killings, and they end up in charge. So how should the church address these ills and ensure that as much as they allow politicians to exercise their right to worship, that they can equally look them straight in the eye and point out these ills? Why do I say that? Because if we see these politicians live among us, we know their net worth. We know how much they're paid. The church has this information. But someone comes in church and gives you 50 million, 100 million, without explaining the source of this money, without being clear where this came from. And the church goes ahead and gets it. How then can the church turn around and start speaking direct to them on matters to do with corruption if, in the first instance, we accepted money that clearly has no explanation where it came from? How has money changed how the church operates in the country today, especially when the money they receive from politicians is a daily and continuous affair?
Well, it is evident that the political class seemingly make efforts to undermine the prophetic voice of the church. And they use money in this case. And remember, it is because of 30 pieces of silver that Judas betrayed Christ. And now the politicians are using 30 pieces of silver to betray the church. We live in a state where in the past, whenever bishops were being ordained, then they were sure that they would get a Prado TX as a gift from a politician that I'm not going to mention here. They would get a Prado for free. They would get millions.
It's to facilitate their movement.
Yeah, not really facilitating their movements. And I really thank one of the bishops. I think he was, appointed as a bishop of the Catholic Archdiocese in Kisumu, where I come from. And this bishop refused the gift of the Prado, and they returned it. And also the Catholic Church refused the gift of $5 million or $40,000. They actually do that. So the message that should be clear to the church is that, one, their integrity will be undermined by these 30 pieces of silver. Their independence is going to be undermined, and they will not be able to speak, because in the same pot where political class dip their hands, it is the church also who gets this money. So I think the church needs to go back to its values, its core values about the riches of this world, because it makes no sense to see religious leaders flying in choppers like politicians, and having such fleet of expensive vehicles. I think this is not what Christ stood for, and we need to take a lesson from the Pope in Rome, who actually, when he came to Africa, he had one of the least expensive cars that we've ever seen. So in short, so long as the church will accept the 30 pieces of silver, their prophetic voice will be silenced, it will be buried, and a lot of evils will happen in this country. And remember, the opposition in Kenya is as good as dead as we speak. The civic space has really been shrunk, and we need a voice, and that is the gap that the church should come in and fill and play its rightful role in determination of the future of this beautiful country we have, Kenya.
You're saying that the church can actually come in and stand in a position of opposition?
Well, in terms of calling out against poor governance, against corruption, and so on, we need a strong voice of the church, a voice of integrity, a voice that has not, partaken of the 30 pieces of silver, and point out, those issues. Remember, in the past, we had Ufungamano initiative, for example, that was led by the churches, and some of the outcome of this initiative, of course, is the 2010 constitution that has guaranteed us all these rights. Therefore, it is still my position that the church has a role to play in the governance of this country.
Is there a church today that can stand and say, we have not received 30 pieces of silver? That we have continued to speak truth to power? That we have maintained the ethos and the ethics that defined us as a church, and that an altar is a place of worship only meant for spirituality of the public?
Well, I have a lot of respect for the church in Kenya, and we have churches such as the Seventh-day Adventists that have, strongly maintained their positions, and have not gone to the extent of, partaking of these 30 pieces of silver. And then we also have other denominations that have really stood up to their call. We have this holiness and repentance ministry. We know of Prophet Dr. Owuor, who has not really gone this direction of inviting politicians and taking these bribes and so forth, among many other clergy whom we thank God for their faithfulness.
You see, Dr. Right there, the reason I asked that question is because you can count them. You get what I mean? You can count them.
Yeah.
And because we can count them, then you look at the bigger population. We give flowers to those who have maintained the ethos that do exist.
Yeah.
But you look at the larger population of churches that do exist in the country, and it's difficult to separate them from the 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
But underneath, there are Kenyans who go to these churches on a daily basis. And there are those who stopped going to church because politics is being preached, is being peddled in churches. There are those who are just plainly tired because there is no way I would come here and my hard-earned taxes are being misused and have been given to you as 30 pieces of silver without asking the difficult questions.
Yeah.
So in terms of the church then being the guide of the larger populace that is Kenya in ensuring that matters of the faith, that even the church itself can stand, that trust has been broken. What will it take for the clergy in the country to get back to their original position?
Well, I would say first that according to 2019 census, 85.5% of the people of Kenya are identified themselves as Christians, and this is therefore the majority, and they follow the message of Christ. And on the other hand, I would say from the history of the church, particularly the nation of Israel, from time to time they fell away from faith and their beliefs and their values and so on. But it reached a point when a revival happened and they went back to, their core message and their core values and so on. So it is no doubt that many Kenyans have lost faith in the church, given the political events that take place. But I think it is time that the clergy can redeem their lost glory and trust and respect that they have. And one way of doing this is once again to stand on the side of the people of Kenya and on the side of the faith. I would give you the example of the Bishop of Maseno South Diocese, who last year made very, very strong statements about the broad-based government and the lies around it and so forth. So when we have such leaders who can see the light, like Paul on his way to Damascus, and stand for the people of Kenya and for truth and for justice, then I think Kenyans are very forgiving and they would be able to embrace the church and redeem it from all this evil of corruption and being even silent when people are killed and all manner of evil take place in this country.
So whereas we're saying that in some cases where it's okay to use the platform, that this church still does have a role to then be able to pursue certain things in our society today?
Of course, the church has done and continue to do a lot of development programs in the country that even includes advocacy, lobbying, and so on. Good example is the NCCK that brings together many churches in Kenya, and through the church we've seen health interventions, education, and so on. So the church has really played a key role, and even some of these politicians who make a lot of noise were beneficiaries of education offered by the churches, and that is why I'm very much against the regulation that is being proposed in the bills of Parliament.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's a conversation that continues, but that we're able to continue to shed light on it. The weekends are coming and there'll be many in number, but we want to thank you so much for joining us in this conversation this morning. Davies Okombo, governance analyst, to be able to look into some of these things that we deal with on a daily basis. Thank you for making time to be on the Situation Room this morning, and we look forward to the next conversation. Our conversations continue this morning. Good morning, 8 a.m.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.